We have seen AI come out, but it's more about the approach. We're starting to see bits of AI with personalization and visuals, but mainly more of a rise in data with data science and automation with RPA, seeing that being a lot more prominent this year. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we've seen that?
Well, the area of technology we're talking about is moving so fast, and people are afraid where to place that big bet. So a lot of the time they find themselves stuck in POC purgatory and not able to actually deliver something into operation. Whereas looking at what you do, how you do it for your internal and external stakeholders, apply automation to that, then helps you understand the data foundation you've got underneath it. And by working on that data foundation, sometimes with the automation tools, you can deliver on the goal of AI in the future. You can also deliver instant value with automation inside your business. So it gives people a way to show their stakeholders that they are doing something, but also gives them the opportunity to do things to operate at scale in the future without being tripped up.
Can I ask you something on that, mate? I think we've all probably got our own AI projects, whether it's at home or at work or whatever, but it's kind of to your point that it's moving really quickly. So do we think it's moving so quickly in terms of technology that organizations can keep up in order to implement, and that's why they're stuck in POC? Or do we think it needs to move quickly in order for organizations to adopt, because it needs to be a certain maturity level to match how the organization is going to implement it?
I think it depends on your end goal. If you're trying to create a platform to sell to the rest of the market, then you need to be at that cutting, bleeding edge. And you need to have that R&D function that can take whatever's popping up when it pops up and do something with it. If you're just trying to keep up with the Joneses or do what you do in a bit of a smarter and quicker way, then actually I think you can take a bit of a pause and reflect and see what everyone else is doing and actually wait to see where AI pops up in your existing app stack. Because a lot of the time, what you already use will help you do things better, faster, at a high level of quality if you give it a few months.
Yeah. I've definitely seen like elements where I'm like, oh, I just wish this bit of technology was a little bit further ahead because I don't know how to fill a gap. And then I've had other instances where I'm like, that's just way beyond what I need right now. So maybe I need to catch up, It's interesting.
And it's a really good point as well, because you look at AI, it is absolutely pervasive, right? Across each of the technology areas that we work in, as well as there being dedicated solutions like the ones that you're talking about, Andy. There's also absolutely, like you said, it's baked natively in now to a lot of the technologies that we sell. It's AI-driven technologies. So it's being attached onto as much as being an island of its own technology and solutions as well. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, completely agree. And in the networking space, for example, if you're starting to think about what information have I got out there, and then how do I gather it, and how do I get access to it in a reliable, robust way, then you need things in place in order to get to it. It might be stuck down the end of a dial-up, let's say, or a really remote, slow connection somewhere. But actually, it needs to be on a fast connection. So the device using to collect the information in the first place might need improving. The infrastructure behind that might also need to be improved.
So let's jump over to business applications. So Chiron, can you talk to us about what's been happening in business applications in 2024?
Sure. We've actually seen quite a few exciting developments in CRM and ERP. Firstly, the same as everyone else, it's going to be the integration of artificial intelligence that has really took the center stage. Provides customers with a bit more of a personalized customer experience, also predictive analytics as well. A couple of, notable trends with this is probably going to be Salesforce's Einstein AI and Microsoft Copilot as well, added onto the CRMs. It's also a little bit of ERP as well, but that's pretty much the same as what we've seen in 2023. The move to cloud is pretty much prevalent, very aggressive move. I think last year, from just statistics from like Microsoft and Oracle and things like that, I think there was a good 20% move. I think this year is looking more like a 35 to 40% move to cloud, which ERP is something that's quite strict for a lot of customers. So they do stay on premise, but all these AI features and automation features coming out, they don't come out for the on-premise customers. So that's why there's such an aggressive move to cloud.
And Karen, is it more of AI in your world? Is it more of a need or a want, would you say, for customers at the moment?
I wouldn't say it's a need. I would say it's a want. It's essentially enriching those solutions that are already there with CRMs, making things more accessible, making things easier. I think it It could be a need for some. It depends in how aggressive their competition is and what they need to do to put themselves above the competition. But essentially, it's making things a lot faster and a lot more accurate.
Because that's the interesting thing, isn't it, with AI? It's the ability I find, at least in my world of networking, to look at lots of different data sources and then collide all of them together. Is it similar, would you say, in the biz apps world?
Yeah, it's exactly the same as that. All business applications is taking data and putting that in a UI format. So it is a collection of data sources, whether that's going to be, let's say, a data source to an ERP system, a data source to your networking and grabbing endpoints. It could be anything, but it's just collected into a system. And that could be a CRM, ERP system. It could be outside of that as well.
Just as I thought on the data, are your customers ready for integrating into Power BI and things like Tableau and making use of it? Or are they still on that journey trying to classify and teach and learn and clean?
Yeah, I think it's 2 stages. I think, yes, they don't have their data in order and know exactly what they want to report on. But I think a lot of customers are kind of in that space. 2023, 2024 is when they started to adopt more of Power BI and more such use their data. But I think it's based on outcomes. What do they want out of that data? And I think now customers are now asking themselves that question.
With Andrew, we've seen the rebound from wanting to go to AI, but not having the data in the right place, coming back to the hybrid platforms. So we can see it's kind of a stalled sentiment with the lack of inertia. So, Kyron, we've spoken in the past a lot about line of business owners starting to become more empowered, make more decisions and more purchases than they used to. Have you seen marketplaces spring up, so application marketplaces in places like Salesforce, for example, that have continued to support that trend?
Essentially, that is the model for business applications. A lot of these tools is a platform. So it's going to give you the basic tools to be able to set up a CRM system or an ERP system. But they need tools and skills on top of that to give a lot of features. So attached to all of these solutions, there's a marketplace. So for Microsoft, there's an app store solution, and that's where ISVs will put their solutions on top of Dynamics 365. Same for Salesforce as well. So it's been a prevalent thing since the birth of CRM systems or SaaS-based CRM systems, and it's where a lot of those vendors are actually putting a lot of their eggs. They're making partners come in and create ISV solutions to essentially cover holes that is already there that they see in other industry solutions for their platform.
You talked a little bit there about how you're seeing AIs spring up in your CRM, ERP platforms, and really needing to move to the cloud to be able to adopt those, and vendors only really putting them in their cloud solutions. Why do you think that is? Why are we seeing that radical shift of cloud, CRM, AI being a single solution almost?
I think it's to do with stakeholder management. I think previously how business applications worked is a sales manager or let's say head of marketing will need a CRM system, and they will go and buy a CRM system. They'll go to IT to say, can you plug this in and make it work for me? Where I think now it's more aligned to the strategy of a company and what they want to achieve as a company rather than specific departmental issues. So yeah, that's kind of been the biggest change is customers are now looking at their data, they're looking at their systems, and they want to make a decision based on what their strategy is. And yeah, 2024 and 2023 are kind of the year for that for business applications.
So a proper maturity of the way a business think about some of these core platforms rather than just, I will buy a product. I need to integrate it into my strategy and ensure all of my pieces, data, AI, are aligned to it so that you can adopt the solution properly and actually get the right analytics out the back.
I think that's something you're going to see across all of these different areas, is there's been a lot of advancements. Some of them have been small advances, some of them have been quite sizable advances with regards to the technologies that have been brought into companies over the past year. Where there has been a consistent thread is the difficulty in integrating these new things with your old systems, whether that be from a data point of view, whether that be multiple CRM or ERP projects, whether it be like the plethora of different cyber products you've got out there, and the list goes on and on. I think that integration bit has become an even larger challenge over the last year.
I would agree with that. That's probably been one of the main motivators of moving from a department ordering a system to IT is the integration complexity, essentially.
So, cybersecurity. Kieran, tell us what's been happening in 2024.
Quite a lot, actually. So obviously security being its own sort of standalone vocation outside of IT, there's quite a lot. So I've tried to split it into 4 areas. So we'll start with the bad stuff, right? Let's get that out of the way. So hacks. So I've picked on 3. They started in May and I've finished them in June because that was the crux of where all the bad stuff happened over 2024. UK Ministry of Defence, large data breach in May, 270,000 records. That was the third-party payroll system. The biggest one, which has actually impacted my third one on the list, which we'll get to in a second, was Snowflake in June. Now, this one was particularly bad because it was very basic in its nature in terms of how they were compromised. So over 100 companies got compromised in some way that had or used Snowflake services. So Snowflake, for anyone that's not aware, it's a big data tool and data warehousing and all sorts of stuff. And a lot of the other technical people in the room could tell you a lot more exciting stuff about that, but I'm just worried about their lack of security. Now, that was basic credential mining. So picking up credentials via some form of social engineering attack. And a lot of these credentials that affected a lot of the companies that were using Snowflake did not have multi-factor authentication, which in 2024, it's pretty basic, right? It's fairly basic. Now, one of the biggest ones that was affected by Snowflake is my third one of the year, which also happened in June, funnily enough, was Ticketmaster. And that was 560 million customer records. That's a lot. And there's a lot of people that use Ticketmaster. And that was obviously via the Snowflake breach. So there's 3 very different breaches there, which kind of tell their own story. So we've had a really large public sector body in the Ministry of Defence. Yeah, you would think security is top priority, and it is for them. You've got a tech company, one of the biggest and the fastest growing tech companies worldwide in Snowflake. Yeah, I think they're top 5 fastest growing tech companies in the world, actually. And then you've had a online retailer because of that tech company. And I think that's telling the story that in 2024, it's really not a case of size, complexity, amount of security people, the amount of controls, the amount of budget that you have in security, right? And speaking of budget, that's where I'm going next. So this is one of a really big thing that's changed in the last year, especially for security. And it's really important, some of the points that I'm going to make in terms of predictions. So hyper growth in security spend from 2021 to 2022. So that sort of post-COVID boom of, yeah, let's spend. We've got money. Like salespeople when they get commission, it's like, spend. That's gone. So it's still up from 2023. So it's 8% of global security budgets are up. They're up by 8%. So when you take into account inflation, that's actually about 5%. That's compared to 16 and 17% in 2021 and 2022 respectively. That's a huge difference in terms of the amount of money, or new dollars, new pounds, that security executives and leaders have available to them. So mostly this has been driven by a change of risk appetite. So 26%, and breach, which was also 26%. So 26% of all budget increases have been because of a change in risk appetite. We deem this more risky. We're going to allocate more money to manage and decrease that risk. And breach. We've been breached. We need to spend some cash. And only 17% of the increase in security budget was actually increased by overall company growth or organizational growth. So that's quite an interesting story, I think it tells. So the actual fact of that and what it means is security leaders are working on kind of a less is more in terms of capital expenditure. So the amount of budgets they're going to spend a year is actually kind of decreased in terms of what they're going to willing to spend. Right. Now, how that's affected technology. In technology, now I'm going to go back to a Gartner stat in 2022, which was a big high stat, right, which said 75% of organizations were trying to consolidate security technology. Now in 2024, new survey from Gartner, love them, 50% said they want to integrate more. Now what does that tell you? Because I know what it tells me. So bearing in mind, in 2022, 75% of those 75%, less than 30% were doing it for financial benefits. So less than 30% were driven by procurement, right? Love procurement as well. Now, basically what that's saying is we're not consolidating on any one vendor's platforms, because what we've actually found in the last couple of years is that that might not always be preferable because of commercial reasons. It might not always be preferable because of capabilities. And it might not also be preferable because of how easy or hard it is to work with those vendors as well. Okay. Now, that brings me on to my last section in terms of what's been happening. This is probably the longest section, and I'm going to start off with a stat on this section. This is a section about governance, risk, and compliance, my faith. But we're talking about the rules. We're talking about the rules of security. This is what governs our entire vocation. So in 2022, love 2022 at the moment, don't I? The World Economic Forum did a survey on cyber and privacy regulations and how effective are they at reducing cyber risk or information risk. Only 22% of the survey populace said they were effective. Now, if we go forward to 2024, someone want to take a guess at what that's increased to?
40.
It's higher than 40, it's 60%. And then if we look at what's happened in terms of what rules we've applied and what's come into force in 2024, that is very much been echoed by across the globe by industry regulators and global directives and governments as well. So I'll start with one. That's the Network and Information Security Standard 2. So NIS2 directive, which came into force on the 17th of October for member states to transpose into law. This is a directive that's all about critical national infrastructure and increasing our cyber resiliency in critical national infrastructure. The scope greatly increased as well to beyond what was in NIS1, and some of the requirements were increased as well. So for the UK, what that meant was in cybersecurity, we had a big announcement in the King's Speech. In the King's Speech, they confirmed that the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill is announced. We know that's going to come into Parliament in 2025, and that'll update based on that NIS regulation. And it will give more power to sector regulators. If it's in telcos, it will be Ofcom. If it's in utilities, it will be Ofwat, for example, for water and all that sort of stuff. So that's going to give them more resources. So the regulatory will be a piece of primary legislation in the UK, which is a law, because we're obviously not part of the EU anymore. And that will give the regulators much more teeth. It'll give them more teeth to regulate, but it'll also give them more funds, more money, more powers. And it's also going to give the government a higher degree of accuracy from things like incident reporting, because at the moment they don't have a good data set on the types of security incidents that we're seeing, especially in critical national infrastructure. So actually help them massively. Across the globe as well, I know we're going to talk about multinational today. So the US National Cybersecurity Strategy was also enacted in the latter half of 2023 into 2024. And that focuses on making larger, more capable organizations more culpable and accountable for cybersecurity and information security across the US. And it's incentivizing strategic planning with investments into things like risk measurements and management and metrics and all those sorts of things. So make sure we're doing the right things to plan for the future.
And Kieran, can I ask you on that? It's interesting. You mentioned around kind of that 8% of spend increase that we've seen. With things like NIS2 coming in, organisations have to do this stuff in some cases. They've got a few years to do it. I'd imagine the security teams are jumping off the floor with happiness with some of this, because it must mean that they're going to unlock more budget because the organisation has to follow the regulation. What's the feeling that you're getting from speaking to people now?
I don't think I've ever met a customer that's jumping off the floor with new regulatory. I'm not going to lie. At least their internal compliance team isn't. But yeah, you're right. By and large, what you're saying is correct. It usually it means an increase in budget. There's a nice Forbes stat, actually, which I happen to know off the top of my head, not on the paper, which is the average cost of maintaining compliance per employee of an enterprise organisation, so circa 3,000 people plus, is £8,000 per person per year. So obviously, if you increase employees, expand into a new region, if you have new compliance, that £8,000 only grows. So the cost of compliance is only going to grow. We have more compliance coming in. Therefore, you will get allocated a higher percentage of what we would normally classify as the IT spend or the IT budget. Yes.
And any more money that comes into security, and if it's regulation driven, usually money gets taken from somewhere else to fund that without a special budget being made available, are you seeing any areas that specifically money is getting taken away from to fund more security investment?
It's less that it's being taken away from, it's more that it's being spent probably more wisely. So the more regulatory, the more directive that you have, and then the more interesting your compliance is in terms of what you need to do in order to follow the rules, basically means the less wasted spend that you get. And I think if I look at some of those stats in 2021, 2022, and even some of the security spend prior, it was very reactive, and we bought a lot of things without a clear direction on why we did that. So actually, I think we're going to spend less needlessly. So I don't think it's going to come from innovation through artificial intelligence as an example, because let's be really honest with security technology. The only people that want to buy security technology is security people. Like, no one else cares. Like, it's not a priority. So in terms of where that money's coming from, I think it's still coming from security, but I think there's just going to be less spend on shiny things.
On that thread about spending money more wisely and being compliant, do you think automation has got a role to play to bake in compliance, for example, and to do things in a more streamlined way?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's probably one of the biggest areas of innovation in terms of applying technology to an area that we typically haven't looked at before, which is governance, risk and compliance. And you can look at any area of governance, risk and compliance and look at a piece of technology that's going to further that area and take the load off humans in the GRC teams of those organizations, or even replace a GRC team for an organization that doesn't have one. So enterprise risk management tools, certification and trust tracking tools, third-party risk management tools, even automating the collection of evidence for things like ISO 27001, even the responding to audits that you may get from your third-party supply chain, your customers, cyber insurance, all these sorts of things. Yeah, 100%. It's making a big difference, and we've seen a lot of customers looking at these types of technologies to improve that area.
It's interesting, isn't it? And on the AI point, you refer to it as this new shiny thing. I still think it's not a new shiny thing. We called AI something different 10 years ago, but let's call it a new shiny thing. GRC and AI solutions, that must be starting to cause a real headache. Does any of that, like government risk compliance, the frameworks that you're talking about, does it capture AI solutions coming into the market now, or do you think that's a future thing?
The conformity assessment is for all AI systems high risk and above. And these are systems that are both consumed from within the European Union, and they are AI systems that output from elsewhere in the globe is then used within the European Union. So it's quite a broad scope as well. The conformity assessment, interestingly enough, is mapping very closely to standards making bodies. So you've got a directive and a regulator that is going to map very close to a standard making body, and we've not really seen that much before. So, for example, if you look at ISO 27001, it's not like a de facto standard that all organizations, corporate organizations have, right? It's good, and a lot have adopted it for things like competitive edge and things like that, but it's not de facto. I think with the conformity assessment mapping very close to the new ISO IEC standard 42001, I'll say that again, 42001. So if you've not seen it or read it, it's only got 4 annexes as opposed to like 14 with ISO 27001. So go have a look, go have a read. It talks about governing risk within those AI systems, and one part of that is assessing that risk with the conformity assessment. So yes, it's having a big impact. We already have a lot of data privacy regulatory, obviously, with GDPR and specifically for the UK, the Data Privacy Act 2018. All of those things still come into effect with relation to PII, so personal identifiable data, patient identifiable data, and personal health information as well, PHI. So yeah, it's still all over it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you look at it, and for me, you kind of look at the AI organizations are adopting. You've got some which they are in control of. We're a bit like when BYOD, I can't say was a nightmare because it still is a nightmare for many organizations. Bring your own AI. It's all moving so quickly. I mean, how does security teams even start to control what their users are doing outside of their control?
Yeah, so interestingly, I'm going to pick up on the last one that you said in terms of bring your own AI in some of my predictions for the tech, which I'm not going to spoil. But what I will say is it's all very well having these rules, because we've just talked about a load of rules. Rules are great if you're following and implementing them correctly. If you're not doing that because of a lack of understanding within the organization of how to do that, or a misinterpretation of how to do that, or you're lacking the interpretation of how do I actually put the controls in place, or there aren't any controls in place, then we've still got problems, haven't we? And I think that's where we're moving to in security for AI.
Hybrid platforms. So, Gary, can you talk to us about what's been happening in hybrid platforms in 2024?
Yeah, so if I go back to Andrew Hermanson from the Data, AI and Automation, I think it's kind of stunned customers in hybrid platforms. The hype cycle of AI was overwhelming everybody with enthusiasm, and I think underwhelming them with what to do because they had to find the business outcome and the challenge. And the good thing about AI is it's a team sport. So for all of us in Opto, it has a place in all of our tech towers, which is good for hybrid platforms because, as I say, I think 2024, a bit stagnant. People weren't modernizing because there's a new reason to do that. The legacy infrastructure has been around forever. So there are kind of 4 key trends, all interconnected, that I'm seeing that are shaking what was in 2024 for hybrid platforms with the onslaught of AI, all around data-driven focuses, because now they're looking at what should they do versus what could they do. So the first trend I'm seeing is AI-ready infrastructure. Most of our partners and vendors are already there with their go-to-market strategies, so we're looking at that in earnest. Hybrid platforms focuses both on-prem and for the cloud. I think most customers are stuck with training LLMs in the cloud, and we see that certainly as a big rise. That's where you go to start LLM inferencing training with your data. So that's the first one, AI infrastructure readiness. The second one is how do they deal with the exponential data growth? Now, this one particularly interests me. So the data management and the protection of the exponential data growth, I think it's by a factor of 5 that by the time you've got AI embedded into most companies and our vendors, that data storage and backup is going to increase by a factor of 5. That's exciting for hybrid platforms because that invigorates what's been very often just an IT market selling storage and backup services. But it's also breaking the mold with the C-suite. The IT team now hold the keys to cleaning, quality, and secure data because we then pass it to the data AI team to say, go make it innovative, go give us some actions, go get innovation out there and insights. So there's a collaboration happening within Softcat, which is great for the specialists. I think it's never been pervasive as it is now. And I think AI has done that. It's made people stop and stand and wait, consider, and then as everybody else in the tech towers have come together, it's what does that mean for us? So that's the third one. So data. The other thing that's happening as well is application modernization. We'll talk about that later in the Broadcom VMware, but not just doing hypervisors, but looking at Kubernetes containerization. Having agile applications that can move across different platforms is also quite interesting. And then the last one is really the private hybrid cloud market, where you can now look at your data and it's data driving. Where do you put that application or what platform? So for hybrid platforms, it's stunned. The sort of mist has risen and the realization of what customers can do helps. It is a team sport. So whilst Andy's out there loving the happy clappy season of AI, the reality is it did, and I was quite harsh on this, I think it took our vendors a while to know what they were meant to say about AI. And looking at Kieran, it took them a while to know what they meant to say about cybersecurity because every one of them start to get tainted with they all sound like each other. You're not the specialist you were as a vendor. So the last thing I'd say is that exponential data growth, that data management, there needs to be another look at the business continuity disaster plans and tests and also the cyber resilience. So they're the things that are changing because of the way that data and AI have come together in the new driven world. So exciting for 2025.
100%. And I think that plays into the real maturity message that we've been hearing, customers thinking a little bit more strategically, AI pushing customers to think a little bit more about this isn't just a product. I need to think about what I'm doing in terms of modernization, agility, and things like that. And you did mention it briefly there, the Broadcom VMware acquisition that finished at the end of 2023. Did we see that give the shift towards, you said, containers, Kubernetes, different ways of consuming?
I saw it most days for the last 9-10 months. It's been a journey, talking to so many customers, 3 or 4 customers a week. If we look at the intent of what actually happened, there were, I call it the 3 Ps.
there was a pricing change for customers, which shocked and stunned them also. So it's part of the hybrid platforms, and the way that they went from perpetual to subscription licensing, that's a different mindset. And then the minimum of 16 cores per server. You can now start to count the number of servers that you have and how many you actually need, because that's going to rise in the way that they're expecting the cost to go up. The other thing was really the product portfolio changes within Broadcom to VMware. Now, I agree the product portfolio changes were necessary because they had something like 2,000 SKUs, and it's now gone to something that fits on the size of a page. But the problem with that is that product portfolio also retired 56 single products in themselves. Now, as a customer, that's very difficult to take the price change, the product displacement, and then you go to the new partner program, which is the 3Ps. Where does that make you sit? If you're an enterprise company and can take the new subscription licensing and the new bundling, and you're using it above the hypervisor, you're looking at containers, you're looking at agility across multi-hybrid platforms, then yeah, but that's not where most customers were. So it's been really, really tricky. I think last month in the Broadcom event, it's their final version of now we've got it sorted. The portal that caused so many people problems looking at their subscription keys and their licenses changed that didn't show up was difficult for them. The understanding of what does it look like in the way that I'm going to be paying renewal costs. I don't think it's dour for the Broadcom. I think they have an exceptional technical platform stack. I think VMware is still the number one hypervisor. You don't move technologies just to change a hypervisor. But what have the other people been doing? This is the part that I'm most interested in. So if you look at the hypervisors, they're really focusing on agility of applications through containerization. They're endorsing and simplifying the Kubernetes side that makes them customers move your application to on-prem versus in the cloud or multi-cloud. And you look at different partners, you've got the server vendors playing very well with hyperscalers now. Give us those monitoring and those tools that allow us to move that agility. That's something that they've done as something more creative than Broadcom came out doing when they just changed to VMware. And I think that's quite significant. The other thing they've done is they're becoming more creative around their pricing models, trying to be more enticing, making it much simpler so that you don't have to go through that trauma of, I didn't understand it with Broadcom, so why am I going to start looking elsewhere? And then the third thing is really, they've started to look at the training and the migration planning. They know it's very difficult to get a customer to move. And there's many people with their emotion and their sentiment about wanting to move. The reality is not everybody have done it as quick as you might think. Some of them are looking at it now. But I think the reason for that is they're looking at the new agile network. They're looking at where do we want our data? Where do we want our security posture? And does it fit with our business needs? And the other thing, and this goes on the same with the hybrid platforms challenges, it's a challenge to rise to the new technologies that I covered. But the real problem for them still is the resourcing. If we look at observability, just as one example, and I know, Tom, you'll talk about that, but stakeholder management of who owns what tool currently and how you manage log and metric, the detail that comes out of it, is an easy thing to sell on paper. The reality is if you don't have the resources for containerization Kubernetes, you haven't got the resources for data analytics in AI, you haven't got the right cyber resilient IT team that know how to play well with the DevSecOps team, and the SecOps, then it's a cultural shift. And all companies are going through that. So even if they have the best technology available to them, even if the right enticement for the commercials, what I'm seeing is we still have to help the customers know how they can take that into their business, how they can sell it across stakeholders, how they can by stealth roll it out. Observability is a good example of that. And then how they can get the C-suite to say yes. How do they get that technical language to a creative commercial language? They're going to make them realize that this is a focused investment. AI makes sense. The value of my data now makes sense. The security of my data makes sense. I've got those people, those stakeholders, and we also have the analytics to tell us where the creativity and innovation comes from. So the team sport is working with cyber, working with networks, working with data AI. My job's never been more collaborative, and I think that's an excellent place to be.
Gary, I'm just going to jump back to something you mentioned there around the whole VMware Broadcom piece, going from pages and pages of different part codes down to one A4 side of part codes. It reminds me a little bit of when we started to see Microsoft with their A5, A3, bundling lots of stuff together. And what we saw as a result, and Kira, you might be able to attest to this a bit, is that organizations, because they had to buy that, they didn't have a choice in it, they then start to get a bit of pressure that they have to use all of that functionality in there, things that they previously might not have even touched, or previously they may have bought another tool from a different vendor to do. Have you started to see any impact of that comparable that I'm making there to Microsoft in that VMware piece?
Yeah, I would say that Broadcom saying 200 SKUs down to a page impresses nobody really. It's not a customer, wow, doesn't do anything for them. It was Broadcom's way of saying we're trying to integrate VMware, we're trying to simplify it for you. But to the point of a page of SKUs, if they are bundled and positioned, sized and priced to enterprise, because you need to make use of all of those services for it to make value, then it's the so what. So the small, medium customers only care, and you see this in the hyperscalers with the E3, E5 licensing, you commit to a minimum spend, but you can't get your application to the cloud because you've run out of time. So what are you going to spend the minimum commit on? So commercially, don't let it distract you. Simple is good if it's simple that you don't even have to announce it. The challenge with Broadcom is they've had to announce the simplicity of why they're doing it and what it's for. But for a lot of customers, that's been confusing and frustration. They're thinking that still doesn't apply to me because I don't need the bundle services. I'm still a virtual instance customer. So I'm very conscious talking to customers about, are we having a commercial conversation about really getting down to the price? And if we are, let's go back to the application maturity and what that application delivers to your business. Let's look at whether your data is doing it, because you might find migrating or you might find changing tack midway through a strategy sounds good on paper, but if you haven't got the resources to do it. So I have to temper the procurement's mindset, the IT's mindset, and they're always at odds because nobody wants to change technology that works versus the pricing. But really the triangle is I want C-suite to be embedded, and AI does that really well. Get the right platform, the right application tooling, get the right business cases, and the C-suite get the brand value and the drive. And I think that's what this year's been about for me, seeing that change.
I think the difference with Microsoft is if you look at what Broadcom did with Symantec, that didn't go too well, did it? I think the reason that was because there was plenty of viable alternative to Symantec that had better capabilities at the time. Ironically, one of them is owned by VMware now, but at the time, Carbon Black was one of those.
Yep.
I also
56.
Yeah, and I also think, Microsoft are the biggest software vendor in the world, biggest software company in the world. I think they've been incredibly clever with how they've diversified a lot of their software stack into including a lot of capabilities around AI, generative AI, cybersecurity, even Xboxes. Do you know what I mean? They have a very broad portfolio, right? VMware is an interesting one, I think, from our perspective in security, because how many net new VMware customers are they getting with new companies and new businesses popping up that are going, I want to do everything on-prem or in this colo data center, or are they mainly cloud-driven? And again, that's going to Microsoft, AWS, or Google.
Certainly Nutanix and multi-hybrid cloud on there.
Exactly. And that, again, it's like a lot of them in terms of containers, they're not going, I'm going to choose to operate on-prem containers. Like, it's not, there's people out there that do that, right? But it's not that common. So I think there's a major difference in terms of the platform's just not sticky from the vendor, right?
Mm-hmm. I think just because the other partners are being more creative, showing them where the future is containers, it doesn't change anything. If a customer can get their commercials right and their technical teams in alignment, they're not going to change hypervisors. They might still do containers with VMware. The stopgap has been in that moment of we have no idea what that means and it's taking too long to get the answers. Everyone else has stolen a march on that technology stack and that opportunity. But got to go back to the application, got to go back to what's securing it, what's going to deliver the brand and what's going to keep it up 24/7. Migration's an easy word. It's very difficult to do.
Gary, just pulling on that resourcing thread you've mentioned a couple of times as you're talking there, are you starting to see automation and maybe even agentic AI behind the scenes to manage the infrastructure to try and scale people like site reliability engineers who are like hen's teeth, really hard to find now, as the infrastructure becomes more scalable and more complex in order to deal with all of those disparate data sources that are popping up.
So on the automation, absolutely. And I speak to a lot of my customers about that, because site reliability engineers is a customer of mine that I knew previously that I was talking to, and he's hiring for them now, and he suddenly makes the light bulb. That's becoming a thing. Automation's always been a desire, but it's a bit like when we use the word data governance in earnest. It's an easy way to explain a problem, but where do you start? And so automation is, and I'm going to say all the gear but no idea. Most customers have all the right tools to do all the things they want to do, but they use it in silos with different stakeholders in a different area. In fact, some of the areas that we're talking about is where automation could be there. Is if they just stopped using 3 tools and do an options between the top 2 and then realize which one would do all of it. And I won't steal Tom's thunder about observability. That's where that's going. And so automation is a desire. The stakeholder management of getting all of those other tools that are doing similar but not in entirety is what's going that way. And then, of course, would I say it's generic AI? I think the partners and vendors still have a little bit of a way to go to clearly help customers understand how they're using AI in their tools. Observability, I think, does a really good job of it. Security areas has been there forever, but in different ways that we know it. And I still think we have to help customers understand how AI is embedded into what we sell instead of just pushing them out to go and do AI on their own. And once we get that balance right, things will start to help automation and why AI is going to be so much more proficient in delivering it to the business.
So if we shift over to networking connectivity, Tom, can you talk us through what you've been seeing in networking connectivity in 2024?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to talk towards kind of 3 areas, and then as a few of them have been alluding to, I'll touch on observability and what that looks like. So 2024 is interesting for me. Networking has typically moved really slow, I'd say. At a 1,000-foot view, networking hasn't changed that much that quick. I'd say in the last 2 years, though, we've started to see a step change in that. We've had that continued adoption of SaaS, cloud, hybrid working. As some of the chaps have been talking about, more workloads moving to the cloud, some workloads actually coming back from the cloud, and we're operating in this very hybrid landscape at the moment. When we look at local area networking, and that's kind of the first area I'd like to touch on, we've definitely now seen that shift to wireless first not being something that's talked about, but something that's actually very much implemented. When organizations are looking at large, wider local area network refreshes, wireless is the thing that they are focused on, because that is the main way that our users now communicate with the network. Wireless is great. There is also a lot of considerations that need to come around that. Things like basic connectivity. Have I got the right coverage? Have I got the right access points to service those users with devices now demanding high amounts of data because of the content-rich applications that they've got? We have got new technologies coming into that world, things like Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7, and they are starting to bolster that environment. Great. At the same time, there's also some real limitations with that technology. Things like Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7 starting to unlock that 6 gigahertz channel. Fantastic, but we've got a big problem that a lot of our devices can't actually communicate on that channel. We also noticed that with wireless standards. They've released much quicker and quicker and quicker over the past few years than we've ever seen. And even though we can see organizations adopting that wireless first strategy, the local area network still has a massive role to play. There's no point in me investing in an access point that can be capable of 5 gigabits per second when the switch that it's hitting is only got a 1 gigabit uplink, right? So it has to be a conversation about the entire local area network, but led with wireless first as the strategy they're adopting. The second bit that I want to talk a little bit about is diverse connectivity. This is something that we are starting to see organizations look at much closer now. And it's that shift away from just having traditional connectivity being wires in the ground for many organizations that typically have 2 coming in, so they've got some kind of redundancy at each of those sites. And now looking at things like public 5G and Starlink or satellite-based communications becoming a real alternative for them to consider for their connectivity needs. That can be replacing a secondary link in an office location because of the speeds that public 5G and satellite are actually capable of reaching now. In other scenarios, it's about connecting now the previously unconnected, places where I might not have the infrastructure in the ground to be able to connect a branch location, or I might be looking to be innovative and start to explore some IoT things in the middle of nowhere and trying to connect those devices in a much better way. Another big part of that story with organizations adopting different forms of connectivity is how do I tie it all together, right? When we come with more variety, comes more operational workload for the people in IT running that stuff. This is where we're starting to see SD-WAN still play a real role here. It is estimated by the time we get out to 2028, 86% of organizations will have SD-WAN in place. I believe it's going to become a bit like a utility now. I believe connectivity already is a utility. But what that can do is very much aggregate those multiple forms of connectivity together, give them the control and visibility that you need of that wide area network traffic, regardless of the form of connectivity that it's going over. The third point I wanted to touch on was multi-cloud networking. Now, I touched on this last year in our Christmas podcast, and it started to move, probably not as quick as what I expected it to, though, if I'm honest with you. So we have organizations adopting cloud, bit of AWS, bit of Azure, bit of Alibaba, and so on. Lots of 5 main kind of cloud providers there knocking around at the moment. The challenge, though, that presents is that each of those cloud providers, although they can do similar things, the native tools within those cloud environments and how you do those things are slightly different. It's like someone working on a Windows device one day and a Mac. They can do similar things, but the way that you do them is, in so many ways, completely different. So we're starting to now see these multi-cloud networking technologies, these overlays now coming to market, which essentially allow organizations to look at all of their multiple cloud environments and their on-premise environments in some cases and say, this is what I want that network to look like. This is how I want things to be deployed into that environment and how the network needs to support it. And what these tools do is allow you to set that state that you desire, and it will then go and interact with all of that native and local tooling to make it so. So we see massive operational efficiency gains there, as well as some security benefits in standardizing your approach to how you deploy networks and cloud environments, whether that is on-premise, hybrid, or just in the cloud. The final one that I will touch on here is into that world of observability. I've been talking about observability now for probably about 2 years, and it's now really started to take off. A lot of people ask me, what is it? What is observability? Because some people call it monitoring. And it is, it's kind of like monitoring 2.0. Observability isn't necessarily a new thing. We've done monitoring for many, many, many years. For me, what observability is and how it's different to monitoring is it's about looking at it as an ecosystem of technology, understanding where I've got key dependencies. If I've got a business critical application, can I understand how that performance of that application links to the VM or server that it's sat on, how that links to the data center network that traffic's going over, the wide area network it traverses, the local area network it comes back down, the wireless broadcast it goes over, ultimately to find out what's the user experience, what's the device experience on the other end. Another comparison I make in that observability space, similar to Kieran's world of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, you always hear the rhetoric of, if you can't see it, you can't secure it, right? You go into the world of observability, and actually I think there's a really close link there to automation and orchestration, which we've been talking a little bit about on this session as well. You can't automate or orchestrate something if you can't observe that thing in the first place. I think this is where we're going to start to see a bit more of a continued evolution of observability in a lot of the organizations we work with. It's great that they can observe things. It will massively improve their operational efficiency in finding issues, what the root cause is, who's responsible for fixing it. I think the next chapter in that book is actually, now we've seen it, how can we automate it? How can we automate our response to that? How can we orchestrate those automations? Even if it's basic things like just triage for a support ticket that's been identified, massively accelerating that, I think is where we're going to start to see organizations go in the future.
Thank you for listening today to part 1. Get ready for part 2.